Cowboy rescued native woman from river, until 5 tribes arrived on horseback with gifts. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. The sun had begun to set on the rugged landscape of the American West, casting long shadows across the dry plains. A cowboy, rugged and solitary, was riding his horse along the narrow trail that wound through the dense trees by the river. His name was Caleb. His heart was as tough as the land he had grown up on. But as he rode, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him since earlier that afternoon. He had been tracking a herd of cattle that had strayed from his ranch, but the storm that had rolled in had forced him to take shelter near the river. As the rain poured down in sheets, Caleb had heard a faint cry. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but the voice grew louder, desperate, and filled with terror. Without thinking, he urged his horse toward the sound. The river, usually calm and serene, was now a raging torrent, swollen by the rain. As he approached the bank, he saw her. A woman, struggling against the current, her long dark hair whipping around her face, her clothing clinging to her skin. She was fighting for her life, but the river was too strong. Without a second thought, Caleb spurred his horse into the water, the powerful current threatening to pull them both under. He reached her just as her strength gave out, pulling her from the grasp of the river. She gasped for breath, her body trembling, but she didn't speak. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Caleb's as if she couldn't comprehend why he had risked his life to save hers. Caleb, with years of experience on the ranch, knew that sometimes the right thing to do didn't come with an explanation. He helped her onto his horse, keeping her close as he guided them toward shelter. His mind raced. She was a stranger, but her eyes, her presence, seemed to speak to him in a way that words couldn't. They rode in silence, the only sounds being the pounding of the rain and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves against the wet ground. As they reached the shelter of a small cave near the riverbank, Caleb dismounted and helped her down. He found a blanket in his saddlebag and wrapped it around her, offering warmth, comfort, and a sense of safety. He couldn't understand why she hadn't said a word. Perhaps she was too scared, too lost in her own thoughts to speak. Caleb didn't push her. He simply waited. The fire crackled in the cave, casting flickering shadows across the walls. It wasn't until the storm began to pass that she spoke, her voice soft and barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. Caleb nodded, but before he could say anything, he noticed something strange. She was looking over his shoulder, her gaze fixed on something beyond the cave entrance. Caleb turned to look. He saw them, figures emerging from the mist. Riders on horseback, their silhouettes dark against the dimming sky. They were not alone. Slowly, more and more riders appeared, their faces hidden beneath hoods and war paint. Caleb's heart raced. What had he gotten himself into? The riders were coming closer now, their horses' hooves kicking up the wet earth as they moved with a precision that could only be achieved by those used to the land. Caleb stood frozen, watching them approach. His heart raced. There were at least a dozen riders, all dressed in similar attire, dark, weathered clothing, adorned with feathers and beads. The leader, a tall man with a long braid of black hair, was the first to dismount. His eyes locked with Caleb's, and for a brief moment, Caleb felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. These weren't ordinary travelers. These were warriors. Without speaking, the leader walked toward Caleb, his posture straight and commanding. Behind him, the other riders spread out, forming a silent circle around the small cave where Caleb and the woman had taken shelter. Caleb stood his ground, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, but he didn't draw it. He could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman beside him moved slightly, her eyes darting between Caleb and the approaching warriors. Caleb noticed how her body tensed, her breath shallow, as if she were preparing for something he couldn't yet understand. The leader stopped just a few feet away from Caleb, his eyes still locked on him. He spoke in a language Caleb didn't understand, but his tone was firm, as though he expected an answer. Caleb opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by the woman, who stepped forward, her voice a soft whisper. "They won't harm you," she said, her words carrying a weight of authority that surprised Caleb. She turned to the leader, speaking in the same language, her voice steady despite the fear Caleb had seen earlier. The leader's eyes softened slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on Caleb. The warriors, still silent, looked on, waiting for something. Caleb didn't know what to do. The woman, still trembling but resolute, spoke again, this time in English. "I am Ayanna," she said, her voice clear. "I am the daughter of the Apache chief." Caleb blinked in surprise, his hand slowly moving away from his knife. Ayanna's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Caleb wasn't sure if he'd heard them correctly. The woman he had saved was the daughter of an Apache chief? His mind raced. He had heard stories of the Apache, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The leader, now identified as Ayanna's father, nodded slowly. His voice, deep and commanding, broke the silence. "You have saved my daughter," he said, his words measured. "And for that, you have our gratitude." Caleb wasn't sure what to say. He had only done what any man would have done in his place. But something about the way the leader spoke made it clear that this was no ordinary thanks. Ayanna stepped forward again, her eyes meeting Caleb's. "We came to offer our thanks," she said softly. "But also, we have something to offer you in return." The warriors behind her shifted slightly, their eyes flicking between Caleb and Ayanna, as though waiting for some kind of signal. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea what they meant by something to offer, but he knew that he was in deeper than he had ever imagined. Ayanna's father, the chief, motioned toward one of the warriors, who brought forward a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was old, the wood darkened by age, but it was clearly valuable. The warrior handed the box to Ayanna, who turned and offered it to Caleb. "This is a gift," Ayanna said, her voice filled with sincerity. "A symbol of our people's respect and gratitude." Caleb took the box hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. As he opened it, he saw something inside that took his breath away. It was a necklace, made of finely woven leather, with a single large turquoise stone at its center. The stone glinted in the dim light of the cave, its vibrant blue standing out against the darker colors of the box. Caleb had never seen anything so beautiful. He looked up at Ayanna, confused. "I don't understand," he said, his voice low. "Why me?" Ayanna's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. "Because," she said, "you have shown us kindness when others would have shown none. And in this land, kindness is rare." The warriors remained silent as the chief stepped forward, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You have earned our respect," he said. "And in return, we offer you our friendship. You are welcome among us, as one of our own." Caleb didn't know what to say. This was more than he had ever expected. A simple act of kindness had led to this, to respect, to gratitude, and to an offer of friendship from a tribe of people who had been at odds with settlers for as long as anyone could remember. It was overwhelming, and for a moment, Caleb could do nothing but stare at the necklace in his hands. He had never thought much about the future or what it might hold. But now, standing before the leader of the Apache, he realized that he was about to be part of something far greater than he could have ever imagined. Caleb stood there, still holding the necklace in his hands, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift. The turquoise stone glistened in the dim light, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a token of appreciation. It was a gesture that carried meaning far beyond what he could understand. Ayanna watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mix of respect and something else, perhaps hope. The chief, having spoken his part, turned and motioned for the warriors to step back. They did so without a word, leaving Caleb and Ayanna standing together in the cave. The storm had cleared, but the tension in the air still lingered. Caleb's mind raced. What did this all mean? Why had the Apache chief given him such a valuable gift? He knew the history between settlers and native tribes was fraught with distrust and violence. Yet, here he was, receiving respect, even friendship, from a people he had been taught to fear. Ayanna seemed to sense his confusion. She stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "This is a beginning," she said. "What we offer is not just a gift, but a chance. A chance for peace, for understanding between our people. You did not hesitate to help me when I was in need. In turn, we offer you something we rarely give, trust." Caleb looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. peace, trust. He had never considered himself a peacemaker. He had lived a quiet life, far removed from the struggles of the larger world. But standing here now, in the presence of these people, he realized that this moment could change everything. "But why me?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm just a cowboy. What could I possibly offer that would be of any use to your people?" Ayanna smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that softened the hard edges of her expression. "You are a man of action, Caleb. You have shown us that you understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. That is rare, and it is something we need." Caleb felt a sense of humility wash over him. He had never thought of himself as anything special, just a man trying to survive in a harsh world. But now, in this moment, he realized that his actions had meant something more to the people around him. The chief, still standing near the edge of the cave, nodded approvingly. "It is decided," he said. "We will extend our protection to you, as a sign of our gratitude. And you, Caleb, will be welcome among us, not as an outsider, but as one of our own." The words hit Caleb like a thunderclap. Protection, friendship. He had spent his life keeping to himself, never wanting to be entangled in the politics or conflicts of others. But now, it seemed, he had been drawn into something much bigger. The weight of the chief's words settled on his shoulders. It was an offer that came with responsibility. The responsibility to honor the trust they had placed in him, to prove that his actions were not a fluke, but a reflection of his character. Ayanna took a step back, her expression thoughtful. "There is much to learn," she said quietly. "But first, there is one more thing we must do." Caleb raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is that?" he asked. Ayanna's gaze shifted to the warriors behind her. "We must prepare you," she said, "for the journey ahead." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected any more challenges. But as Ayanna turned to face the warriors, who began to assemble once again in a circle around them, Caleb understood that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Ayanna's father, the chief, stepped forward once more. "The journey is not just a physical one," he said, his voice firm. "It is a journey of the mind and spirit. You will learn not only the ways of the Apache, but the ways of the land itself. If you choose to walk with us, you must be prepared to embrace everything that comes with it." Caleb swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what that would mean, but one thing was certain. He couldn't turn back now. The warriors began to chant softly, a rhythmic sound that filled the cave and reverberated through the walls. It was a call to action, to a new chapter in his life. Caleb felt the gravity of the moment. He had saved Ayanna, but now, she and her people were offering him something far more valuable, an opportunity to stand beside them, to become part of their world. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The fire crackled softly in the center of the Apache camp, the night air cool against Caleb's skin as he sat cross-legged beside it. The warriors had set up their camp in a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees, the smell of burning wood mixing with the fresh scent of the forest. Caleb was still trying to process everything that had happened since that fateful day by the river. The warmth from the fire contrasted sharply with the chill in his bones, a reminder that everything he thought he knew had changed. Ayanna had been quiet since the ceremony where the chief had spoken of the journey ahead. Her face was unreadable, and Caleb couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. He had saved her life, but now, it seemed that their fates were intertwined. The chief had told him that the journey was not just physical, but spiritual. Caleb didn't fully understand what that meant, but he trusted the Apache's wisdom. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the trees, Caleb was summoned to join the warriors for a ceremony. The chanting had begun before sunrise, a deep, rhythmic sound that reverberated through the ground beneath his feet. Ayanna was there, standing in the center of the circle, her eyes closed as she focused on the words of the chant. Caleb had seen this before in other cultures, but there was something different about the Apache way. The sense of unity, of connection to the land and to each other, was palpable. The chief stepped forward, his presence commanding. His gaze met Caleb's, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed to lift from Caleb's shoulders. "This is your moment, Caleb," the chief said, his voice steady but filled with meaning. "The journey ahead will test you, but it will also teach you. You must walk in the ways of the Apache, not as a stranger, but as one of us." Caleb nodded, feeling the gravity of the chief's words. He had never considered himself part of any tribe, but here, surrounded by these people, he couldn't help but feel that he had found something he never knew he was looking for. The ceremony continued, with the warriors stepping forward one by one to offer their blessings. As each one approached Caleb, he felt their strength, their resolve, and their connection to something greater than themselves. It was humbling. Ayanna was the last to step forward. She looked at Caleb with a soft smile, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "You have done more than save my life," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the chants. "You have shown us what it means to give, without expecting anything in return. That is rare in this world." Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. He had only done what anyone else would have done, but Ayanna's words made him realize that what he had done was significant. It was more than just an act of kindness. It was a bridge between two worlds that had been separated for so long. As the ceremony came to a close, the chief called Caleb to his side. "The journey begins tomorrow," he said. "Prepare yourself. You will face challenges, but you will also learn the strength that lies within you." Caleb wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that he was no longer just a cowboy on the outskirts of the world. He was part of something larger, something that could change the course of history. That night, as the camp settled into silence, Caleb found himself staring at the stars above. They were brighter than he had ever seen them before, as though they too were watching over him, guiding him toward a new destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, but Caleb felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had saved Ayanna, but in return, she and her people had given him something even more valuable, a chance to become something greater than he had ever imagined. Tomorrow, the journey would begin, and Caleb was ready. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the dense trees, Caleb could feel the weight of the journey ahead pressing on his shoulders. The warriors had gathered early, their horses ready and their eyes filled with determination. Caleb stood among them, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared himself for what was to come. The chief, who had spoken so kindly to him the day before, now wore a serious expression. He called Caleb to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Today, you will face the first test of your journey," the chief said, his voice filled with authority. "You must prove that you can endure what lies ahead. The land will challenge you, as will the people. You must remain strong, not just for yourself, but for all of us." Caleb nodded, his mind racing. He had no idea what kind of test the chief was referring to, but he knew that this was no ordinary task. He had already committed himself to this path, and there was no turning back now. As they set off into the dense forest, the warriors moved with ease, their horses navigating the rough terrain as if they had been born to it. Caleb, on the other hand, struggled to keep up. He had spent his life riding across the plains, but the dense woods presented a whole new challenge. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches reaching out like the hands of the past trying to pull him back. Ayanna rode beside him, her presence a constant reminder of the bond they shared. "You will learn to trust the land," she said, her voice calm and steady. "The land knows you better than you know yourself. You must listen to it, and it will guide you." Caleb glanced over at her, grateful for her support. Despite the hardships, he felt a sense of peace whenever she was near. The deeper they went into the forest, the more Caleb realized just how vast and untamed the world was. The sounds of the forest, birds calling, the wind rustling through the trees, felt alien to him, like a language he hadn't yet learned to understand. But there was something comforting about it too. The rhythm of nature, the pulse of the earth, seemed to resonate with something deep within him. After hours of traveling, they came upon a clearing. At the center of the clearing was a large, fast-moving river. The water churned violently, the current strong and unforgiving. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he saw the test laid out before him. The chief turned to face him. "This river will test your will," he said. "You must cross it alone. No one will help you." Caleb swallowed hard. The river was raging, its waters crashing against the rocks with such force that it seemed impossible to survive. But he had no choice. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Ayanna gave him a nod of encouragement as Caleb dismounted his horse. The others stood silently around the clearing, watching as Caleb prepared to face the river. With a deep breath, he waded into the water. The current hit him immediately, pulling at his legs, threatening to sweep him away. Caleb fought to keep his footing, his heart racing in his chest. The water was cold, numbing his body as he fought against the force of nature. Every step felt like it could be his last, but he pushed forward. He thought of the chief's words, of the strength the Apache saw in him. He had to prove himself, not just to them, but to himself. The river was relentless, its power nearly overpowering him. But Caleb dug deep, focusing on the rhythm of his movements and the strength in his legs. Slowly, step by step, he made his way to the other side. The roar of the river seemed to fade as he reached the opposite bank, gasping for breath. He had done it. He had crossed the river. As he stumbled to the shore, exhausted but triumphant, he looked up to see the warriors watching him. Ayana's face was filled with pride, her eyes gleaming with approval. The chief nodded silently, as if acknowledging that Caleb had passed the first test. Caleb's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. He had faced the river, and he had won. But he knew that this was only the beginning. There were many more tests to come, and the journey was far from over. As they gathered their horses and prepared to continue their journey, Caleb felt a newfound sense of strength within himself. The river had tested his body, but it had also tested his spirit. And for the first time in his life, Caleb realized that he was more than just a cowboy. He was becoming something greater, something that would make a difference in the world. He was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Caleb's crossing of the river were filled with a quiet intensity. The Apache warriors, though silent and reserved, treated him with a new respect, and Ayana, who had been distant since the river crossing, now appeared more approachable, offering Caleb rare moments of guidance. The land around them, vast and untamed, had begun to reveal its secrets to Caleb. He no longer felt like an outsider, but a part of something much larger than himself. As the journey continued, the group traveled deeper into the wilderness, moving with purpose. The sounds of the forest were now familiar to Caleb, and he felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the chief called Caleb to his side. The firelight flickered as the chief, his voice low and steady, spoke. "You have done well so far," he said, "but the real test is ahead of you. The land will challenge you, Caleb. It will test your strength, your resolve, and your heart." Caleb stood silently, taking in the chief's words. He had already faced the river, but the chief's tone suggested that something far greater awaited him. That night, Caleb slept fitfully. The winds howled through the trees, and the sound of distant wolves echoed in the night. But Caleb's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He knew the journey would be long, but now, he understood that it was about more than physical endurance. It was about the connection between the land, the people, and the spirit. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, the chief gathered the warriors together. Caleb, who had become accustomed to the routine, joined them without hesitation. The group moved quickly, their horses picking their way through the dense underbrush, as the chief led them to a cliff that overlooked a wide, deep valley. Caleb could see for miles in every direction, the vast wilderness stretching out before him. The chief turned to face the group. "This is the Valley of Trials," he said, his voice filled with gravity. "This is where you will prove your worth, not just to us, but to yourself." Caleb's heart beat faster as he listened. He had heard the whispers of the valley's dangers. The trials were said to be brutal, testing every aspect of a man's character. There was no turning back now. Ayana, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. "The trial begins today," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Each of you must walk through the valley and face your own personal trial. You will be tested by the land, by the creatures that inhabit it, and by your own fears." Caleb nodded, though his stomach churned with unease. He had already faced the river, but he knew the valley would be something different entirely. As the group descended into the valley, Caleb felt the air grow colder. The landscape around him was rugged and unforgiving, with jagged rocks and towering cliffs rising up on either side. The valley was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird of prey. As the group moved deeper into the valley, Caleb noticed the subtle shifts in the environment. The terrain was growing more difficult, the path narrowing, and the rocks beneath his feet becoming more treacherous. His thoughts began to drift to the chief's words. This was the trial. This was where he would face his fears and doubts head-on. After what felt like hours of trekking through the harsh terrain, Caleb came upon a small clearing. The others had already scattered, each facing their own trials, and Caleb found himself alone in the clearing, the air heavy with tension. Suddenly, he heard the rustling of leaves behind him. He spun around to see a large figure emerging from the shadows, an enormous mountain lion, its golden eyes fixed firmly on Caleb. The creature's growl rumbled through the air, and for a moment, Caleb froze. This was it. His trial had come. The mountain lion was a symbol of strength and power in the Apache culture, but to Caleb, it was a test of his own resolve. He had no weapon, no backup, only his wits and his courage. The lion's gaze was unrelenting, and Caleb knew that if he didn't act quickly, he wouldn't survive. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about physical strength, it was about mental fortitude. Caleb backed away slowly, keeping his eyes locked on the lion, never showing fear. The creature circled him, its growls growing louder, but Caleb stood firm. He could hear the chief's voice in his head, reminding him that the land would test him, but that he was capable. It was then that Caleb realized the truth. His fear was his real enemy. As the lion lunged, Caleb made a sudden movement, dodging the creature's strike with agility he didn't know he had. He quickly scrambled up a nearby rock, gaining the high ground. The lion growled in frustration below him, but it didn't attack again. Caleb's heart raced as he stood there, watching the mountain lion retreat into the shadows. He had passed his first true test, not with violence, but with courage and control. When Caleb finally returned to the camp, Ayanna was waiting for him. She smiled softly as he approached, her eyes reflecting pride. "You have faced the valley, Caleb," she said, "and you have proven your strength." Caleb nodded, exhausted but satisfied. He had taken the first step toward understanding his place in this world. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. As the days passed, Caleb's confidence grew. He had faced the valley's challenge and survived the mountain lion encounter. But his journey was far from over. The Apache had shown him a new way of thinking, of living in tune with the land and its rhythms. Every moment felt like a lesson, every step leading him further away from the life he had known and deeper into the world of the Apache. The following morning, Caleb awoke to find the camp stirring with activity. The chief had called for a gathering, and the warriors were preparing for something significant. Ayanna approached him as he packed his belongings, her expression serious but not unkind. "You have shown your strength," she said, her voice low. "But today will test your wisdom." Caleb paused, looking up at her. "Wisdom?" he asked, still unsure of what that meant. "The land is not only about strength," Ayanna explained. "It is about knowing when to act and when to wait. Today, we will teach you to see the signs of nature, to understand its language." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had learned to endure and fight, but now he would have to learn to observe, to listen, and to wait. As they ventured into the forest, Caleb noticed how the warriors moved with ease, almost as though they were a part of the landscape itself. There was no rush, no urgency in their steps. They simply followed the path the land had laid before them. After a while, they stopped at a clearing where the chief stood, waiting for them. He motioned for Caleb to approach. "This is where you will learn patience," the chief said, his voice calm and steady. "You will learn to track and to observe, but more importantly, you will learn the importance of timing." Caleb knelt beside the chief, his gaze following the trail of animal tracks that led through the clearing. The chief pointed to the ground. "These tracks," he said, "belong to a deer. But notice the pattern. The deer has been moving in and out of this area for some time." Caleb studied the tracks closely. He could see the marks of the hooves in the soft earth, but it was the subtle signs around them that intrigued him. The broken branches above the tracks, the disturbed leaves, these were the details that mattered. "The deer is wary," the chief continued. "It knows something is wrong, but it is not yet ready to flee. The key is understanding when to strike and when to wait. The deer will not move until it feels completely threatened." Caleb nodded, absorbing the lesson. This was different from anything he had experienced. Out here, it wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about knowing the land and the creatures within it. "The land speaks in ways that we must learn to understand," the chief added. It will not give up its secrets easily, but if you listen closely, it will tell you everything you need to know. After hours of tracking, Caleb began to see the world in a new light. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees and wildlife. It was a living, breathing entity with its own rhythm and heartbeat. The warriors moved with a quiet grace, their eyes alert to every movement, every sound. As the day wore on, the group reached a narrow river that wound its way through the valley. The water was clear, but Caleb could see the ripples and eddies that indicated something was beneath the surface. The chief turned to him. "There is a test of patience here," he said. "The river holds its own mysteries. You will wait for the sign." Caleb crouched beside the riverbank, his eyes trained on the water. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but he trusted the chief's words. Time seemed to slow as he focused on the movement of the water, the shifting shadows beneath its surface. Then, a flash of movement caught his eye. A fish, sleek and fast, darted just below the water's surface, its scales shimmering in the light. Caleb held his breath, watching as the fish moved further downstream. He knew now that the river had revealed its secret to him. It wasn't about catching the fish. It was about recognizing the moment, the precise moment when the right opportunity would present itself. Caleb stood up slowly, his heart racing with excitement. He had passed the test, not with force, but with patience and observation. The chief nodded in approval. "You see now," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Patience is not waiting for something to happen. It is waiting for the right moment, understanding that the land will show you the way, if only you have the wisdom to follow." Ayanna smiled at Caleb, her eyes filled with a quiet admiration. "You are becoming one of us," she said softly. Caleb didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt truly connected to this world. The Apache had taught him more than he could have imagined, lessons of strength, patience, and understanding. And as he stood by the river, with the warriors at his side, he knew that he was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were some of the most challenging Caleb had ever faced. He had learned to survive the wilderness, to listen to the land, and to move with purpose. But there was one test that still loomed before him, one that would challenge not just his body or his spirit, but his very understanding of the world around him. The chief had called it the final trial, and Caleb knew that it would push him to his limits. The warriors had gathered in the early morning, their faces stern and focused. Ayanna, who had been more of a guide than a companion, stood by his side as they prepared to embark on the last leg of their journey. The chief addressed the group, his voice steady and commanding. "Today, you will face the trial of fire," he said. "This is not a trial of strength or skill, but of your heart. It is the moment when you must choose between your past and your future, between what you have known and what you are becoming." Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as the chief's words sank in. The trial of fire, what did it mean? The chief turned to Caleb, his gaze sharp and knowing. "You have come far, Caleb," he said. "But now, you must prove that you can leave the old world behind. You must embrace the new life that awaits you. And in doing so, you will be tested by fire." The warriors, who had been silent until now, nodded in agreement. Caleb didn't know what to expect, but he felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. Ayanna stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "You have shown us your strength, Caleb," she said. "But this is different. This is where you will prove who you truly are, not just to us, but to yourself." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat dry. The fire, was it literal? Or was it a metaphor for something else? The chief led the group to a nearby canyon, its walls towering high above them. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood, and Caleb could see the flickering light of a fire up ahead. As they drew closer, he saw a ring of flames, burning brightly in the center of the canyon. The fire was real. It was massive, its heat intense enough to feel even from a distance. The chief turned to Caleb. "This is the trial," he said. "You must walk through the fire and come out the other side. But remember, it is not the fire that will test you. It is what you carry within yourself. Your fears, your doubts, your past, they will all be laid bare in the flames. Only by confronting them will you emerge truly free." Caleb stood at the edge of the fire, staring into the flames. They crackled and roared, the heat almost unbearable. His heart raced as he thought about what lay ahead. The fire seemed like an impossible challenge, but he had faced so much already. He had crossed the river, endured the trials of patience and wisdom, and stood his ground against the mountain lion. He had proven his strength, his resilience, but this was different. This was the moment that would define him. Taking a deep breath, Caleb stepped forward. The flames seemed to part as he moved toward them, their heat licking at his skin, but not burning him. With each step, the fire grew hotter, the smoke stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. He could feel the weight of his past pressing against him, the memories of his life as a cowboy, the loneliness, the pain. But as he walked, he began to let go of those feelings, one by one. The fire wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a test of his spirit. He had to shed the old version of himself, the one that had been shaped by fear and doubt, and step into the new man he was becoming. As he reached the center of the flames, Caleb felt a surge of heat unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as though the fire was burning away everything that had held him back. His thoughts, his past, his fears, all of them dissolved in the flames. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Caleb stood on the other side of the fire, unharmed, the flames now fading behind him. He felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The warriors were waiting for him, their faces filled with approval, but it was Ayana's gaze that held his attention. She smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You have done it," she said softly. Caleb looked around at the group, feeling a sense of peace that he had never known before. He had passed the trial, not just by enduring the fire, but by embracing the change within himself. The chief stepped forward, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You are no longer just a cowboy," he said. "You are one of us. You have proven your heart, your strength, and your spirit. You are now part of the Apache, and your journey has only just begun." Caleb didn't know where this journey would lead, but as he stood there, surrounded by the Apache, he knew that he had found something he had been searching for his whole life. He had found a place where he belonged, a place where his heart was free. And with that, he was ready for whatever came next. The days after Caleb's trial of fire passed in a blur of learning, growth, and acceptance. The Apache had embraced him as one of their own, and he had come to realize that his life had changed forever. No longer just a cowboy, he had become a part of something far greater, a brotherhood tied not by blood, but by respect, courage, and the land itself. Ayana, who had once been a stranger to him, now stood beside him as both a guide and a companion. Together, they traveled with the Apache warriors, moving through the vast, untamed wilderness that had become their home. Caleb had learned the ways of the Apache, from the quiet patience of the hunt to the deep respect for nature that guided every step they took. He had become a part of the rhythm of the land, each day a new lesson, a new opportunity to grow stronger and wiser. One evening, as they sat around the fire after a long day of travel, the chief called Caleb to his side. The fire flickered in the darkness, casting shadows across the chief's weathered face. "You have proven yourself, Caleb," the chief said, his voice filled with pride. "But the greatest trial is yet to come. It is not one of strength, wisdom, or patience, but one of heart. You must choose what you will leave behind and what you will carry with you." Caleb felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had faced many trials, crossing the river, surviving the valley, walking through the fire. But now, it seemed, he was being asked to confront something far more personal. The past that had shaped him, the life he had left behind, and the future that awaited him. The chief continued, his voice steady. "The land has welcomed you, Caleb. But the question is, what will you do with the gift of belonging you have been given?" Caleb didn't have an answer. His mind raced with conflicting emotions. He had spent his life alone, living by the rules of the cowboy world, where survival came first and everything else followed. But now, standing among the Apache, he felt a connection to something deeper, something that transcended the individual. Ayana, who had been silently watching, spoke up. "The land has given you its trust, Caleb," she said softly. "It is time for you to choose the path you will walk." Her words lingered in the air, and Caleb knew she was right. The time had come for him to decide what kind of man he would be. He had already proven his strength, his patience, and his wisdom. But now, he had to prove his heart. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Caleb stood at the edge of the camp, looking out over the land that had become his home. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. It was a land that had tested him, but also one that had welcomed him with open arms. He knew that he could never return to the life he had known. The cowboy who had ridden the open plains, alone and distant, no longer existed. He was now a part of the Apache, bound not just by their ways, but by his own choices, by the heart that had found a new purpose. As he turned to rejoin the group, Ayana approached him. She didn't speak at first, but her presence was enough. She understood. Together, they rode side by side, their horses moving in unison as they traveled through the vast expanse of the land. Caleb no longer felt the weight of uncertainty that had once plagued him. He had made his choice, and in doing so, had found a new path, one that was filled with hope, with purpose, and with the promise of a future he had never imagined. The Apache, who had once been strangers to him, were now his family. The land, which had once seemed vast and unforgiving, was now a part of him, its rhythm in his heart. And as they rode into the distance, Caleb knew that his journey was far from over. It was just beginning. The trials he had faced had shaped him, but they had also prepared him for the challenges yet to come. The road ahead would not be easy, but with the Apache by his side, Caleb knew he would face it with the same strength, wisdom, and heart that had brought him to this moment. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly at home. Immerse yourself in the gripping world of Western stories, where the untamed landscapes and fierce battles between settlers and Native American tribes come to life. Follow the journey of a cowboy as he discovers a new purpose and finds his place among the Apache warriors. As he faces countless challenges and trials, from crossing raging rivers to confronting his deepest fears, this story unravels the essence of strength, resilience, and wisdom. Experience the breathtaking moments of growth as the cowboy learns the ways of the Apache, embracing their culture and finding a deeper connection to the land. These Western stories are filled with action, deep emotional conflicts, and a powerful message of belonging. Witness the cowboy's transformation as he walks through fire, not only in a literal sense, but also in his heart, facing difficult choices that will shape his destiny. This journey is not only about survival, but about understanding what it means to truly belong. As the cowboy embarks on his final trial, a test of his heart, he proves that real strength comes from within. These Western stories highlight the beauty of redemption and the power of embracing new beginnings. From the vast wilderness to the profound bonds formed with the Apache, these Western stories capture the true spirit of the Wild West and what it means to forge a new path in life.